Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today, well, it's to unpack a stack of sources all connected to H.G. Wells's novel, The Undying Fire.
That's right. We've got bits from the book itself focusing on this character's really profound suffering and the big philosophical debates that spiral out from it.
Think of this deep dive as maybe a shortcut, getting to the heart of Wells's arguments in this story.
Yeah, we're exploring some huge questions: suffering, faith, what education is for, the future of humanity, really. And it's all through the lens of the source material you've brought.
Okay then, let's get into it.
Yeah.
So where does Wells actually start us off? Who is this main character, Job Huss?
Well, we meet Job Huss, and he's in a really bad way. He's supposed to be the successful headmaster, Willing Stanton School, very prestigious.
But things have gone wrong. Seriously wrong.
Oh, yeah. A whole series of disasters, one after another. The school building burns down. He loses his entire personal fortune, bad investments. The source even mentions Russian rubles.
Okay, so that places it historically right around maybe 1918, end of the war.
Exactly. And then, terribly, his son was killed in the war. And just to cap it all off, he's just been diagnosed with cancer.
Wow. So physically sick, financially ruined, grieving, his career basically in tatters. He sounds completely crushed.
Utterly. He's stuck in this rather bleak place, Seaview, in Sundering-on-Sea. The source paints this picture of real isolation.
It's him and his wife.
His wife, who is understandably, distraught herself, and also their landlady, Mrs. Kroom.
And she doesn't sound like much comfort.
Not really. She seems mostly bothered by the inconvenience of it all, the money, his upcoming operation. There's not a lot of empathy there.
So it's less a recovery spot, more like a pressure cooker for his despair. And Wells sets this up with a very deliberate framing device, doesn't he?
He does. It opens with a prologue in heaven. You can't miss the echo of the Book of Job.
God and Satan again.
Yeah, but here, Job isn't just one man. He sort of stands for man, for humanity. And Satan's argument is pretty dark. He sees humans as basically tormented, stuck, limited creatures.
Arguing that God's whole human experiment is, well, a failure.
Pretty much. That sets up the core tension right away. Is there some divine purpose behind all this suffering and chaos? Or is it just meaningless torment, like Satan suggests?
And Huss's personal disaster becomes the focal point for that huge question.
Exactly. And then into this awful situation walk these visitors, 3 of them first.
The school governors, Sir Eliphaz, Mr. Dad, and Mr. Farr. And they're not exactly there to offer condolences, are they?
No, not really. They turn up, and their main concern is practical. How do we replace Huss? What's the future of the school?
So their minds are on business, basically. A total contrast to what Huss is going through.
A stark contrast. They represent these, different ways of looking at the world, maybe more conventional ways.
Let's talk about Sir Eliphaz. He seems the most philosophical of the 3.
He is, but his philosophy is very much tied to worldly success. He kind of implies that if you're prosperous, God must approve of you.
And he looks at nature as proof.
Yeah, he points to all these things, the complexity of the human eye, how plants cross-pollinate, insect wings, snowflakes, the way water expands when it freezes. He sees it all as evidence of God's, providence, mercy even.
He even gets into spiritualism.
Yeah.
Mentions someone called Raymond in these afterlife planes where flaws get fixed.
He does. His view is that everything, even tricky things, fits into this bigger, benevolent, ordered plan. He even tries to find moral lessons in, believe it or not, parasites.
Parasites? How does that work?
He calls them socialists of nature, suggesting their degeneration teaches us about self-reliance versus dependency. He even thinks maybe they're evolving towards being helpful.
Right. So even the nastiest bits of nature have a hidden purpose in his book. What about the other 2 governors? Mr. Dad.
Mr. Dad is much more down to earth. The source says he's really focused on figuring out who's responsible for things. Very practical, tends to speak in unfinished sentences, always wants to get things sorted.
Impatient with Huss's deeper worries, I imagine.
Definitely. And then there's Mr. Farr. He runs the technical side of the school.
Yeah, the practical skills guy.
Exactly. He's all for technical training, thinks history is just stuff that's over and done with, a very narrow, specialized viewpoint.
So you've got these 3, and then there's also Huss's doctor, Dr. Barrick. He brings another perspective entirely.
Completely different. Barrick is practical too, but he's openly agnostic. He talks about life being driven by this indifferent process.
A process? What does he mean by that?
It's like this ongoing test. It tries things out, organisms, ideas, whatever, and if they don't measure up, they just get discarded. No purpose, no morality, no foresight involved.
So he's skeptical of big ideas like the spirit of God.
Deeply skeptical. He thinks human behavior is mostly driven by, well, wanting attention and people not being very truthful.
And things like beauty or morality, for him, they're just what helps things survive this process.
That's his take, yeah. And crucially, he doesn't buy into any automatic happy ending, no guaranteed leap to some kind of beyond man. If humanity wants to get better, he thinks, it has to actively make it happen through sheer will.
Okay, so we have Sir Eliphaz's comforting providence, Barrack's cold, indifferent process, and Huss is stuck in the middle of this in terrible pain. It's like a philosophical collision in his sick room.
It really is. And this collision forces Huss to make his own argument. Because based on his suffering, he just can't accept the neat explanations his visitors offer.
And his view seems heavily influenced by this specific experience he talks about, this walk in the country.
Yes, that's pivotal.
Mm-hmm.
He describes trying to get away from his misery, hoping for some comfort from nature, but finding the opposite. Constant irritation, even cruelty.
Physical stuff first.
Yeah, little things but relentless. Snagged by thorny thistles, these tiny insects, harvesters burrowing into his skin, making him itch unbearably, flies and gnats just persecuting him.
But it's the animal encounters that really hit hard in his account.
They're incredibly vivid. He finds this young rabbit, horribly mangled, skull-crushed, flies already on it. Then he sees a butcher bird's larder.
What's that?
It's gruesome. Beetles, baby birds, even a mouse, all impaled on thorns in a bush, just stuck there in agony. And then he sees a cat savagely attack a bird, leaving it twitching.
He says it was like scales had fallen from his eyes.
Yes, revealing what he calls a face of boundless evil in the universe. It's a profound shift.
And he focuses on animal suffering specifically. Why?
Because animals, unlike us, can't rationalize pain or find spiritual meaning in it, right? So their suffering seems to him like pure evidence of nature's indifference, or maybe even its malice.
He gives examples.
Lots. Herbivores living in constant fear, animals like the rhino or buffalo that seem just perpetually angry, tigers living in hungry fear, and those king penguins.
The source mentions them being killed for oil.
Right on their nests. It's horrific. Human cruelty piled on top of their already difficult lives, driven by this exaggerated maternal instinct that causes them suffering anyway.
It's a bleak picture. But he also gets specific about parasites.
Yes, things like entozoa, wasps laying eggs inside living caterpillars, liver fluke, trichinosis. He's saying these aren't accidents. Their whole existence, their very design, seems based on inflicting slow, cruel death.
Which makes him question the creator. How could a good God, especially when using evolution, design that?
Exactly. That's the core of his despair at this point. His conclusion is that life itself feels fragile, almost random, like a weak and inconsequent stirring in the dust, heading for extinction.
So the world of life seems like the creation of something malignant, or just careless.
That's how he sees it then, malignant or carelessly indifferent. His own pain and what he saw in nature directly contradicts any idea of a benevolent God for him. He just can't square it.
The universe, from his perspective there, seems empty of mercy.
Utterly devoid of any comforting plan.
And from this focus on natural cruelty, the story then zooms out to human suffering, right? Especially the Great War, which is the backdrop.
Yeah, the war becomes this colossal example of human-caused misery. Huss points to the sheer scale of it, millions dead, millions crippled, the destruction, the famine, the disease that follows, just unbelievable waste.
And he doesn't blame God for this.
No, he blames us. Human disorderliness, he calls it. Our lack of deep understanding, ignoring history, failing to work together.
And he gives examples of how our own cleverness goes wrong, like poison gas.
Right. He makes the point that the scientists who developed it weren't necessarily monsters. They were maybe just patriotic, doing their bit, being good chemists. But in this bigger picture of, well, ignorance and lack of a shared plan.
He describes how it worked.
Yeah, chillingly.
Yeah.
A first gas to make soldiers rip off their masks in nausea, then the lethal gas follows. He acknowledges the technical skill involved, but contrasts it with the absolute horror and futility of it.
That's that gap, isn't it, between individual skill and the awful collective result. That's his disorder.
Precisely. And maybe the most powerful symbol he uses is the submarine.
He calls it a miracle of short-sighted ingenuity. Why should he?
Because, he argues, it's almost as dangerous to its own crew as it is to the enemy. It tortures and kills the men inside it, too.
He describes life on board.
Grimly. Cramped spaces, foul air, maybe poisonous fumes from the batteries, the violent rolling, the constant
They're
danger.
being death-charged.
Terrifying. The boat shaking apart, leaks starting, the slow, crushing pressure as it sinks, the desperate fight for the hatch, and even if you escape, you might just drown wounded on the surface.
He tells a story about one specific German sailor.
Yes, a young guy, initially idealistic, then disillusioned by his poor education and the reality of war, who ends up dying that horrible, trapped death.
And that sailor becomes a symbol.
A symbol for the common fate of great multitudes, Huss says. And this leads to that really powerful, dark metaphor. All the world is a submarine.
Meaning we're all trapped, living in these cramped, dangerous, fearful conditions, fighting each other instead of living in the sunshine and freedom that should be possible.
Yeah, all because of our own failures. Lack of understanding, lack of unity. It's a bleak image, but framing it as a human problem is key.
Because if it's a human problem, maybe there's a human solution. Despite all this darkness, Huss does find some hope, doesn't he?
He does, and this is where he introduces the central idea of the undying fire in the hearts of men.
He calls it the God in my heart. How is that different?
It's crucial. He explicitly sets it apart from any indifferent universe or the traditional idea of an external benevolent God. This fire is internal to humanity.
And it's described as rebellious.
Rebellious and adventurous, yes. It's a force within us that fights against the chaos and cruelty he sees. It's not passive acceptance. It's active struggle.
So it's not Sir Eliphaz's providence, and it's not Dr. Barrick's cold process either.
Exactly. For Huss, hope isn't guaranteed from outside. It has to be found and ignited within our collective will, fueled by this inner fire.
And his way out of the submarine, his solution is education.
Yes, but a very particular kind of education. He means a deep, shared understanding of history, of humanity's journey, our place in the cosmos.
More than just basic literacy.
Much more. It's about building a common consciousness, realizing we share origins and maybe a destiny. He even floats the idea of a common language to help us truly connect and cooperate globally.
But he's not saying education just magically makes people good.
No, he's not that naive. But he thinks it provides essential enlightenment. It helps us see foolishness and evil for what they are, like diseases we can understand and maybe combat. This shared knowledge lets us build better systems, organize our intelligence for common goals.
And what's the potential outcome he imagines if we achieve this?
Oh, it's a grand vision. Mankind uniting to make the world a garden, solving social and political problems deliberately, using science for everyone's well-being, food, leisure, health, actively working to banish cruelty, even improving the human race itself, not by blind chance, but by conscious, directed effort.
It's inspiring, but it's still a fight, right? No guarantees from anywhere else.
Absolutely. Humanity has to earn it, which makes the final part of the sources you shared quite interesting.
Because things suddenly change for Huss. He recovers physically.
Unexpectedly, yes. The growth they feared was cancerous turns out not to be malignant. A huge reprieve.
And his external situation improves too.
Dramatically. The war ends, which is good for the Allies. There's talk of the League of Nations, a glimmer of hope there. His finances recover a bit. And against the odds, he gets to keep his job as headmaster.
How does that happen? I thought the governors were ready to replace him.
It turns out some of the school's alumni, the old boys, rallied for him. Led by, ironically, Sir Eliphaz's own nephew, Kenneth Burroughs.
What was their argument?
They basically said Huss's teaching was vital. He taught history not as dead facts, but as their story, a continuous human adventure. They felt it gave them meaning and direction, especially through the war. They believed his approach put them on a high road, not a dead end.
So that validation from his students, plus his recovery, maybe even a dream he had under anesthetic, it all reinforces his ideas.
It seems to solidify his belief in that undying fire. His conviction that humanity has the power to rule all these things, pain, suffering, the apparent chaos of the world.
So even though things get better for him personally, the core insights from his time of despair remain.
They absolutely do. If anything, he seems energized. He starts thinking about new, maybe even more ambitious educational projects, ethnological museums, grouping schools together. His fundamental perspective, forged in suffering, holds firm.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. What are the main takeaways from this deep dive into the Undying Fire?
Well, through Huss's really intense journey, Wells makes us grapple with this fundamental tension, doesn't he? Between a universe that often looks cruel and indifferent and our deep human need for meaning and
We
purpose.
saw different attempts to explain a divine providence, an indifferent process.
And then Huss's big idea, this rebellious, creative spark inside humanity, this undying fire that pushes us to try and bring order, beauty, understanding out of the chaos. And the key tool for that is shared knowledge, deep education.
It definitely doesn't give easy answers. It leaves you with some pretty big questions to wrestle with. Like, how do you personally square the suffering you see, natural disasters, human conflict, personal loss, with any idea of a purpose or a caring force?
Yeah, and where do you place your hope, really? Are you looking for something external to intervene, or do you believe, like Huss seems to, that it's all down to human will, human cooperation, lighting that fire within ourselves?
It forces you to think about what you actually believe about reality and our place in it.
And here's maybe the really sharp edge for today. Think about the huge problems we're facing now: conflict, climate, divisions. Is Huss's diagnosis still relevant? Is a core part of the problem still this lack of shared understanding, this failure to see the bigger human story we're all part of?
And maybe more personally, how do you keep that undying fire going in your own life, that spark of purpose, that little rebellion against indifference or despair? How do you feed that?
Definitely something to think about. Until our next deep dive.